Good morning, and once again, due to the coronavirus outbreak, we at New Life are trying to do everything by live streaming and posts so that we can still maintain as best we can a normal worship service. This is a Sunday school class that ordinarily that I would be doing for the adults. Now we're going to kind of reduce down to 30 minutes and run through it so that at least we will have some form of Sunday school that we can attend as well. Again, just as last week, I have Marlene, my wife, here with me so that we can have a little bit of discussion back. It's not quite the same as when we have it at the church where we've got 10 or 12 people throwing things around the table, but this is how we're going to go about it and hope that you enjoy it and can get something out of it as well. Our lesson this week is number 4. I'm sorry. It is number 4. Number 4 for March 22nd. The lesson focus is hear this, embrace justice, and model righteousness. And the scripture is out of Micah. Now, Micah is one of the minor prophets. He's a contemporary, excuse me, he's a contemporary of Hosea, Isaiah, and not Daniel, and he was active around 700 BC. So that puts him about 100 years or so prior to the Great Exile and prior to Habakkuk, who we studied last week. And so, whereas Habakkuk was prophesying and warning them right before the Assyrians came in and conquered them, Micah is actually 100 to 150 years beforehand as he's going into things. Now, what we have is whereas last week he was talking about the injustice that everyone was doing and how they were about to get punished, and that was Habakkuk's message, and Micah's is about the same. He has a message to the ruling class of Israel, and Micah they're still not in exile, so they're still hanging around Jerusalem, and Micah is from a town that's just outside of Jerusalem when he comes in and starts working his way as his prophecy. Now, I'm going to kind of skim through the lessons for the student book. Now, what I am going to do is actually put it in as a separate post with some of you I know have the lesson book at home. Some of you don't. It's available online. It's a David Cook lesson, this adult book. So you can actually download PDF files of the lessons. But I've made copies of this week's lesson, excuse me, and I will post them separately. And in the first bit of story here in lesson 4, it talks about a man who was at a estate sale, told the widow who was running the sale that he was actually interested in guns if she had any, and she had said, yes, my husband had one, and brought out a shotgun that he had actually left in the closet. And the man looked at it and immediately realized that he had a very valuable antique weapon. And when he asked her how much she wanted for it, she, not knowing that it was worth anything, said, how about $100? And this kind of took him aback, and while he was thinking about it, the next thing, she just dropped the price to $50, and he said, fine, I'll give you $50. And he took it and walked to the car. He had second thoughts because when he got to the car, it was just hidden him that he's a Christian. He professed to be a Christian, and here he was taking advantage of this lady. And so he went back and told her, he said, ma'am, I can't really take this from you for $50, says it's probably worth a lot more, and I just feel bad. I don't want to take advantage of you. Now, she told him that she didn't really know how to go about selling a gun, and that she might make a deal with him, that if he would sell it, he could have half of what they got. Well, it turned out he was able to sell that to a collector for $12,000. And when he came back to her, she was just almost in tears because she said she was only hoping to make enough money from the estate sale to pay that month's mortgage payment. And with the $6,000, she could actually pay off the mortgage. And he just, because he was a Christian, just overwhelmed by the situation, just let her have the entire amount. And this brings us to the three questions, which is in what situations do you find yourself tempted to take advantage of others or treat them unfairly? I'd like to think at this particular stage of my life, I never feel like I want to take advantage of anybody.
Well, it's just like just watching TV lately with the coronavirus, it's, like people going out and buying the overabundance of toilet paper and people being without toilet paper or without hand sanitizer and not being able to find it. And some people can't go from store to store and look for it.
Right.
So, instead of just taking their one or whatever they were supposed to take, they bought multiple supplies so it would run out.
Yeah, that's a good example that we happen to be involved in right now. And of course, it's easy to say, well, if I don't buy it, somebody else will. But then that's just putting you in that same boat. I actually had more identity with the second question, which is, why is it easy at times to treat others in ways that are inconsistent with God's standards of justice and righteousness? Now, this I can get a little more behind because it's way easier for me to consider when somebody is really, I see them mistreating people, or I know that they're trying advantage of me. I don't feel so bad if I turn the tables on them and take advantage of them. But it's still wrong, either way you look at it. But it is easier because now you got a rationalization of that, yes, they deserve this treatment. But that's not how we are called to act as Christians. And then the third question was, what are some of the consequences of failing to do what God says is just and right, and what could motivate us to be more diligent in doing so? And that's a good part of that, is the diligent. I mean, what's the motivation that makes us stay on track and act as a Christian should act? And I say often that we can't really do this if it's just out of fear of the consequences. It really has to be motivated from the heart that you really want to do what God and Jesus wants us to do. We move over to the scripture. Let's see, Micah again. Let's say he was running around. And like I said last time, people have trouble with the Old Testament because it seems like it's repetitive. And what they miss is that actually a lot of these books are happening at the same time. Micah was around as Isaiah, Hosea, and possibly Amos was in prophesizing, and he's actually quoted several times by Jeremiah. And so he comes up quite often, so it's all kind of meshes together. But the first part of our scripture is Micah 3, 1 through 3. And then I said, listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel, should you not embrace justice? You who hate good and love evil, who tear the skin from my people and the flesh from their bones, who eat my people's flesh, strip off their skin, break their bones in pieces, who chop them up like meat for the pan, like flesh for the pot. Micah's not mentioning words here as he goes into it. The questions attached to this particular bit of scripture is, what were some of the things the Israelites were guilty of? And they were what he's coming up with there is, he hasn't said it outright right here, but the Israelites were actually guilty of idolatry by this time. They had violated God's instructions and had intermarried with the pagans, and some of the spouses had brought their idols and worshiped with them. And the Israelites who had intermarried like this, some of them found themselves actually worshiping the idols with their spouse. This is one of the biggest things that Micah was calling them to task for. And then we have, what were some of the things their leaders were guilty of? The problem with the leaders, and this is what we hit right now, is that the leaders were actually not merely allowing this activity to go on, and oftentimes they were facilitating it by making it easier for their rich friends to profit by exploiting the poor people into it. You know, again, not much different than what we find ourselves here. And one of the things that is important, since this is very similar to the lessons that Habakkuk was given to them right before the Assyrians came in and the exile happened, and this is happening 150 years prior to it. So it's not as if God is not long suffering, and the fact that it seems like things are going well for us right now doesn't mean that consequences are not eventually going to come. God will not be fooled. The scripture carries on with 9 through 12. We skip over to verse 9, still chapter 3. Hear this, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel, who despise justice and distort all that is right. Who builds Zion with bloodshed and Jerusalem with wickedness? Her leaders judge for a bribe, her priests teach for a price, her prophets tell fortunes for money. Yet they look for the Lord's support and say, is not the Lord among us? No disaster will come upon us. Therefore, because of you, Zion will be plowed like a field, Jerusalem will become a heap of rubble, the temple hill a mound of overgrown with thickets. So as Micah goes on, he's continuing to provide details of what's going on that is displeasing God so grievously, and where he's going to come around to actually bringing justice upon these people who are doing that.
But they were thinking that they had a relationship with God, even though they were doing wrong, that they thought it was safe what they were doing.
Right.
Because they already had a relationship with God.
That's kind of our question 8 in that, is why did they believe they could get away with this?
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of says it there. It says you built the temple. That's their whole thing. God's chosen people thought they were God's chosen people, and since they had a temple, then that means God was in the temple, and God surely wouldn't let the temple be destroyed since that's where he lived. That's what they were counting on for safety.
Mm-hmm.
God's pointing out to them that it's what's in their heart, not what is in the temple, that comes around. And this is happening, a century before the consequences actually came to them. We have to be careful in ourselves just to think that it seems like this has been going on for a long time, that God's not really sleeping. He is going to come around and take care of things before it's over with. And in the last of our scripture is, we skip over to chapter 6 and verses 6 through 8. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of olive oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Now, this is a recurring theme that we have, both from Jesus said the same thing to the Pharisees about, your offerings are worthless to me because of the way that you're acting. He comes down to it. We have questions here, 10 through 12, is in what ways does God want the Israelites to respond to the recognition of their spiritual deficiencies? And what response would he accept? And we go through all this scripture to get to the answer to that, is the very last one. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. That's he's really just pointing out, when they put out all these things about don't bother bringing me 10,000 rams or even sacrificing your firstborn, none of your offerings, and we can bring it into our own thing, showing up to church regularly, giving to charity regularly, doing tithing, none of that has any effect if in our heart if we go out of church and we're treating people unjustly, if we're taking advantage of those who are in our power, if we're stepping on people who are less fortunate than us. This is not what God calls us to do, and anything that we try and do that we think is the ritual, like the prophets and priests were trying to